Welcome back to another episode of Novelio. Today is Friday, May 21st, 2021. I'm going to continue on with my reading of Hot Winter Sun by Jessica Russell. Over the next week, the family received word that the Royalist army had reorganized and that Prince Charles was now its commander. Nevertheless, the Parliamentarian army had made great gains in the south and west of England. Prince Charles spent a significant amount of time in Cornwall, primarily at Truro and Launceston. Even as this gave those in Cornwall a sense of security, most knew that their situation was precarious and could be shattered by a whisper. One day, Edward saw Catherine as she returned from a ride and bluntly asked her if she believed King Charles would lose. "Certainly he will not," she answered, only because to say otherwise could be construed as treason. But even as she said it, her look conveyed to Edward that she believed the opposite to be true. "I'm worried, my lady," Edward said. "We all are," Catherine replied, almost in a whisper. Edward then said, "May I come in to the servants' quarters to speak to Sarah for just a moment?" "Of course," Catherine replied, and went her way, hoping that Sarah might find something to care for in Edward and perhaps get over her fixation on Stephen Godfrey, which she must now know was coming to nothing. The next day, preparations for the harvest ball and house party began in earnest, but Catherine's attitude toward them were somewhat half-hearted. Everyone in the family had determined to make merry for as long as they could, despite the war, but the situation with Sarah caused Catherine to have a heavy heart. She remembered Sarah saying there would soon be an announcement, and she now realized she was hoping it would take place at or around the time of the harvest ball. Poor Sarah! To Catherine it seemed that there was a desperate, unhappy look in her eye. Finally she went to see her on the day when she seemed particularly sad. "I came to see if you were all right," Catherine said, and Sarah smiled at her wanly. "It is not going to happen, my lady," she answered. "I should have known it was far too good to be true." Catherine tried to comfort her but failed. She wished that one of them had noticed Sarah's affection for Stephen growing and done something before it reached this stage where Sarah would be hurt. Catherine began cautiously, "May I speak frankly to you?" "But of course," Sarah replied. "May I suggest that you not allow yourself to become so focused on marrying a lord or a landowner, and choose your eventual husband because you love him and he loves you? You believe I'm seeking to raise my station through marriage?" No, of course not," Catherine said quickly, "but you seem to only consider those who have a particular station, and you may be missing a match that is right under your nose. I know that may seem somewhat hypocritical, considering my social standing obviously improved upon my marriage to Robert." Catherine decided she may as well make that point before Sarah had a chance to do so. Nevertheless, she continued, "I had no thoughts in my mind of marriage to anyone when the attraction sprung upon between us. We fell in love and only considered the differences in our backgrounds after the fact. Nevertheless, I would have married Robert if he were a peasant in the village because I loved him. That is all I want for you. Certainly, if a lord or a baron asked for your hand, you should not feel unworthy. I'm merely saying you should consider any respectable man you like and who feels the same about you." She was thinking, of course, of Edward. "You are right, Catherine," Sarah said, "as you always are." She suddenly stood up and gave her an affectionate hug. "I think I must be a bit more sensible in the future. I think I got carried away," she said, smiling and frowning at the same time. Overall, Catherine left feeling much better about the situation, and Sarah did seem a bit cheered in the days that followed, even responding a bit to Edward's overtures, which were not subtle. Catherine mused on Carinsa's romantic thoughts about Julian and Robert, Sarah's infatuation with Stephen, and Edward's interest in Sarah, and pondered the jumbled mess love could be sometimes. More news arrived in early October that at the end of July, only 2 weeks after their arrival, new model army troops had taken control of Bridgewater and Dorset. There was virtually nothing Julian or any of the men could say to cheer the women now, as even those who knew little about war and politics realized the end was near. However, social gatherings continued mainly as a ruse to allow landowners and other royalists to discuss strategy. Catherine remembered Robert's words so long ago, when he accurately predicted that the king no longer had enough loyal followers to be victorious. She heard that even now his wife and children were somewhere abroad, attempting to garner support from other countries. But for all the Queen's determination, this was apparently coming to nothing. One day after she visited Robert's grave and that of her mother's, she wondered what would become of her child if they ended up nothing more than vagabonds in a foreign country. She finally determined that if the three of them stayed together, she would ask for no more, but did not probe her thoughts too deeply on the matter. November came in warm and breezy, with not a hint of the turmoil that the country faced in its soft winds. It was on everyone's mind, however, and Catherine did all she could to create a happy atmosphere in the household, particularly for the children. Although there was intense uncertainty to be met each day, she was at least pleased with the way Clarissa and Matthew were learning, and had to admit that in spite of whatever resentments Clarissa might have, she was certainly a gifted teacher. She said this to Jennifer one day as they clipped roses. Clarissa is a marvelous teacher, despite having no experience at such tasks. It seems odd that she is so unwilling and reserved in social situations, yet is totally expansive with children, as if she feels entirely secure in their presence. Before Jennifer could answer, however, Sarah suddenly came upon them, interrupting quite hastily, which was an odd thing for her to do. "Catherine, do you have a moment for me?" "Yes, of course," she replied, looking at Jennifer, both of them aware of the girl's earnestness and wondering what could be wrong. "Do you want us to speak privately?" "Yes," Sarah replied with a pleading look in her eyes. Jennifer watched them go, puzzled, and Sarah followed Catherine to the solarium. However, when they sat down, Sarah seemed unable to do anything except stare at the floor. "Sarah, you seem extremely troubled. Wouldn't it be best to tell me what it is?" "Trouble? That is the word for it, my lady," she finally blurted out. "The worst kind of trouble." Catherine immediately guessed the problem and said, "You've been with a man and now there are consequences?" Sarah again looked away, and it was several moments before she could meet Catherine's eyes. Catherine began thinking at once about how she could formulate some sort of solution. Perhaps after the couple were married, they could say the child was born prematurely. Indeed, many premature infants were likely the result of such circumstances. "How did it happen?" Catherine asked. "I don't know," she wailed. "Cook warned me he was a philanderer. Nevertheless, I believed he was truly in love, and I suppose I fancied myself in love as well. Now I don't know what to do." "He refuses to marry you?" Catherine asked incredulously. "He can't marry me, mistress," Sarah replied quietly. "He's betrothed to another woman. I thought perhaps he would leave her and marry me instead once he knew about the child, but he refused to even grant me an audience after I told him my condition. Perhaps I can persuade him to do the right thing, particularly if his employment depends on the manor. The other woman must accept a broken engagement. A child one has already fathered is far more important than a promise of marriage in the future. Shall I speak to him?" "I'm afraid it would do no good, my lady," Sarah replied. "He does not get his living at Briarwood." "He works for a neighboring estate?" "He is the heir to a neighboring estate." Catherine immediately thought of Stephen Godfrey, but couldn't think of what to do if he was the father. Julian certainly couldn't go to one of his peers and demand that he marry the housekeeper of a neighboring estate, although she chafed at the unfairness of it. "Tell me, Sarah." "It's Stephen Godfrey, mistress." "I knew it. You have led yourself down a primrose path with that gentleman. Stephen Godfrey has a suave manner with all women, from what I've heard, enjoys the chase and conquest better than the eventual commitment. This is why it does not do to be naive in this life, Sarah, as this type of situations is often the result." "Well, what of you and Robert?" Sarah lashed out. "Robert plucked you from the blacksmith shop and made you lady of the manor. Why couldn't Stephen have done the same for me?" Catherine allowed her this display of emotion, considering the circumstances. "He could have, Sarah, but you must be wise in your dealings with people. Merely because someone can do something does not mean that person will. It depends on one's character. You must remember that most people are not willing to fly in the face of convention, and Stephen Godfrey is certainly not one of those who would." She wanted to make sure that Sarah did not think she was implying she wasn't good enough for him, but merely that she was being unrealistic to think he would marry her. "Unless a man has professed love and makes it clear from the beginning that your station in life does not matter, you must assume that it will matter greatly, if not to him, then at least to his family. Robert has a wonderful family, yet most were quite shocked and disturbed when he suddenly married a villager. You must take my advice, or you may find yourself in this situation again." Well, you are correct, as you always are, my lady, but what do I do presently? There comes a time when such a condition can no longer be concealed, and that time is now. Indeed, Catherine was shocked when she found out how far along Sarah was, and realized that it was imperative to settle the matter somehow. Let me speak to Julian, Catherine said. At this, Sarah's eyes widened with horror. Oh, no! He will turn me out quicker than you could imagine. That's why I came to find you as soon as he left for Plymouth. He is the last person I want to know. I can assure you that he would never put you out. This I know for a fact, but I must speak to him. Finally, Sarah conceded, and after Julian returned, Catherine immediately sought him out. She looked rather helpless, and he could tell she was quite nervous. Go on, darling, he said. It cannot be as bad as all that. Here, sit down. He pulled her onto the divan. You can tell me whatever you want, and I promise I will have the remedy for it. At this she smiled, but he noticed that there was some uneasiness in her expression. Well, I believe no one can remedy this, she said. It concerns Sarah. Oh, no, who is she chasing after now? If that girl keeps up, she will die of a broken heart. By her own hand, Julian chuckled. No, Julian, 'tis no laughing matter. She's going to have a baby. She looked at his expression for any signs of outrage, but he appeared quite indifferent. Are you not shocked? She asked. No, darling, life rarely shocks me. Such things happen. Will the man marry her? He is engaged to Matilda Frenshaw. Godfrey! I might have known, said Julian. Sarah is always dejected when she discovers that a man who glanced her way was not about to propose, but she seemed so desperate over that whole affair that I wondered if it had gone further than it should. Perhaps I could speak to him on her behalf. I should at least tell him I'm not pleased with his behavior, but he certainly won't marry her. The match with the Frenshaws was talked about since Stephen and Matilda were born. But what will become of the child? Asked Catherine. He will be born and raised, I imagine. He laughed, but I'm afraid I can do little or nothing to help Sarah's embarrassment or repair her reputation. Perhaps I should marry her myself to straighten matters out, he said, and laughed again. Julian, this is nothing funny about this. Her heart is broken. I think she really loved him. As has been said before, Sarah would love anyone who took notice of her, and apparently she allowed Stephen to take too much notice and in the wrong way. When will women learn? Men were deceivers ever. And plenty of women are deceivers as well. Catherine replied, thinking of Lizette, but it is unfair that women are judged more harshly in these matters, and men can escape with no penalty or embarrassment. That, my love, is because these little peccadillos have certain consequences for women, whereas men can deny ever knowing the woman, and who can prove that otherwise? I agree it's unfair. It's just the way it is. What shall I tell her? Of course, you must tell her that I am not overjoyed with her behavior, as hypocritical as it sounds, but it will certainly not change her position in the household, although I imagine she will need some time off to care for the inconvenient visitor. You, Catherine replied, are a despicable person to make jokes about this. But he could see she was relieved and took the opportunity to put his arms around her. Never fear, my darling Cathy, she will have the child. It will cease to be a 9 days' wonder, and life will go on. Catherine told him that she must go and tell Sarah at once, in case the girl was planning to do something desperate. Okay, love, run along then, and try to be at least somewhat stern, he called after her with a smile, shaking his head at what he considered life's little tragedies. The next day he rode over to the Godfreys' estate and asked for an audience with Stephen, which was granted. I know you are aware that our head housekeeper, Sarah Milford, is with child. She claims the child is yours. What have you to say about that? Stephen said nothing, and Julian continued. How did it happen? In the usual way. Am I to be amused by that statement? Julian asked. Oh, don't be so prim and proper, Julian, Stephen replied. You are a man of the world and have enjoyed the company of plenty ladies. You know how these things come about. Soon I will be married man, and as such will have to mind my behavior. As if you would. You are incapable of fidelity, Stephen, but that is beside the point. I would think you would have at least some interest in your own child. Ah, but is it my child? I happen to know that Sarah had a few similar encounters with Ralph Middleton, and the child could be indeed his. The Puritan? Julian asked incredulously. I highly doubt he would have endangered his mortal soul for a romp with a housekeeper. Oh, but he did indeed, and then afterwards he treated her as if she were some evil emissary of the devil, come to take him to the gates of hell. I was merely there to pick up the pieces. Well, you left something after the pieces were gathered, and now there's to be this child. Whether it is yours or not, I am not pleased about your behavior with Sarah. You wouldn't really begrudge me sowing a few last wild oats before I enter a lifetime of marital bliss, Stephen replied jokingly. Well, kindly refrain from sowing them in my field from now on, was Julian's reply, and the interview came to an end. One night, several weeks after his pointless conversation with Stephen Godfrey, Julian came upon Catherine in the chapel alone, with only a single candle burning. He knew it was not the first time she had done this. He purposely made a bit of a sound when he came in to avoid startling her. "Why do you come here, Cat?" he asked then. "To pray," she said simply. "Is that not why one comes to a chapel?" "Yes, sweetheart, but not at night when it's dark and cold." He studied her intently, but she didn't look at him. He saw something unreadable smoldering in her eyes. "Catherine," he said suddenly, "please look at me and answer a question." She turned to him, curious and hesitant at the same time. "Is there someone you were thinking of? A person to whom you might go? Somewhere you would rather be than here? Is there someone else who loves you?" As soon as he said it, he wanted to take the words back, but in another way he was glad to have finally asked it out loud. He knew she had loved his brother, and had carried an overwhelming grief since his death that had only recently lifted, but always that puzzle of the man she met in the woods. The mere thought of it caused a cold fear to grip him, despite Jennifer's opinion that it was likely an innocent meeting. She looked at him, frowning with confusion that was apparent. For a moment her eyes locked with his in a way he could not quite comprehend, and at length she answered, "I have no one but you. And you are happy here, are you not?" "When I am not thinking of my father, I am happier than I ever thought I could be after I lost Robert." All at once she lowered her gaze and began to talk about the baby. Her words came swiftly and somewhat nervously, and he quickly realized why. He had been unable to read her expression because it was too inconceivable to have seen it on Catherine's face. If another woman wore that look, he would have translated it into an instant, because it was clearly one of scorching passion. The next morning, still mulling over this new knowledge, he found her in the garden enjoying the last few warm days of autumn. She was watching Robert in his carriage and remarked that maybe it was too chilly to have him outside. "But I think a bit of fresh air is good every day." "Ah, he's a sturdy little fellow. He'll be fine in the sunshine for a bit," Julian replied. "I know the household thinks I'm overprotective and ridiculous, but he's all I have. He's my reason to go on in this life." Julian sat down on the bench next to her. "I'd like to think you have us too," he said, putting his hand on her shoulder. "I do," she replied softly. "There is not a day that goes by that I don't feel grateful to have all of you and to be raising my child in such a wonderful home. It's just that where Robert is concerned—" "Kathy, darling, you don't need to explain. Of course, it's different when it comes to Robert. He is all we have left of his father and your beloved child. I don't really blame you. You are a wonderful mother, and I know you will raise another beautiful person such as yourself." "How happy I am that you see me as a beautiful person," she said. "I always did, sweetheart. I believe I was merely afraid of myself. Can you imagine my embarrassment when Robert returned with you as his wife, when only a few days prior I was treating you as if you were addled and making indecent propositions as if you wouldn't have sense to refuse me?" At this, Catherine smiled and said, "Well, I certainly gave good account for myself." "That you did," he replied laughingly. "I was no match for your quick wit, that's for certain." Later, Catherine pondered on how differently things turned out from the way she once thought they would. Herself and Julian in the garden watching the child, laughing in the sunlight about their past arguments, was something she'd never dreamed possible. However, she didn't want to probe her mind too deeply regarding her feelings for him. It had all become so confusing lately. She knew she loved the twins equally at one point, yet her love for Robert had grown deep and intense, and she had drawn away from Julian's more forceful nature. Nevertheless, she worried that her separate feelings for him had never quite died, and now that he was there, alive and beckoning, it was difficult to restrain the emotion within her. She couldn't picture her life without him, and one day as she watched Carissa and Julian outside with Robert, she felt a pang in her heart at the thought that perhaps he would eventually ask Carrie to marry him. She dismissed it, though, as it seemed that the romance between Harold and Carissa had progressed, and that she suddenly felt better because of that. She forced herself to turn from the window then. "It is all so difficult and complicated. Better to just not think of it. At almost the exact same time in France, Julien's detective approached a small but comfortable-looking home in the French countryside on the outskirts of Paris and asked its lone servant if the young woman who resided there was named Sabrina. When the man departed to find the mistress of the home, Ernest noticed an ornament with the letters S and A entwined on its surface, and he remembered that Julien had mentioned Sabrina. The young man was called Armand. Before he had time to ponder this any further, a lovely young woman came to the door, who so much resembled Clarissa that Ernest knew immediately he had found the right person. "If you are the sister of Lady Catherine Bradshaw, formerly Catherine Trefilner, I have happy news for you. She is well and the mother of a baby boy. My name is Ernest Balfour, and I have come from her home with a message. My dear sister Catherine, I am elated to have finally discovered where to write to you, and I must first tell you that I am happy and well. Armand is a wonderful husband, as well as an astute merchant, and my only complaint is that I do not yet have a child. However, I hear that you do. I am longing to see him, and I am so sorry to learn of the tragedy that befell you last year. I am glad that it seems you're safe and protected from our father, and I would do anything to see you all face to face right now. Traveling to England is probably unwise at this time, but I know that you may soon be on your way here, and I will do anything I can to help you get established. We have a humble dwelling, but you and Robert's relatives are welcome to come here, especially since I ran off with little thought to anyone but myself. While I was young and impetuous, I suppose you must forgive me. I will pray every day that you remain safe in England and anxiously await the day we can be reunited. It sounds as if you are in good health. I am also expect, of course, when I overexert myself. Please write to me at this address as soon as you can. I long to hear from you. Have you heard from Christopher? Please let me know if you have. Your grateful sister, Sabrina."